Mary Beth, do you want to introduce yourself, your role, who you are, and a little bit about you?
Well, good morning, Juanita, and thank you so much for inviting us here today. I am a parent advocate. My 27-year-old son was diagnosed with neuroblastoma back in 1999 with a 15% chance to survive. So, right out of the gate, things were extremely precarious, but we were able to get through treatment. But what we have found since then, and but over many, many years, is the extent of the treatment and what it can do on the lives of our children. And as time goes on, as they mature and become teenagers, and then as they move on to become young adults, how we continue to learn more and more about the impact of that treatment as late effects continue to develop. Many, in fact, have gotten a lot worse. We've had many additional diagnoses as well. And I have found it very important to stay involved so that I can help the support and the awareness and hopefully working with and have had wonderful opportunities to work with some wonderful experts to create additional supports for our survivors and for their families. Our survivors are the number one population that is impacted by cancer, but very much second are the parents and the siblings and grandparents. And it is a family impact. And so not only am I advocating for the survivors themselves, but everyone in the family that's involved because they've all incurred the trauma and they're continuing to experience what the impact is of those late effects and survivorship. In our family, it's myself and my 27-year-old survivor. I also have a 25-year-old who has been absolutely marvelous, but we're not quite sure if my 27-year-old will ever have an opportunity to be able to live on his own. We celebrate his independence to the best that he can. He can be independent every day, but my 25-year-old knows that there may be a day where I no longer may be able to support his older brother, and he may have to carry on that responsibility of support. And we've talked about that a number of times. And that's a pretty heavy impact on a young adult who's just trying to figure out his own way in the world. And so I think all of this is such an important thing that at the time that we started our role in survivorship, there just wasn't very much out there. We were still focusing so much on keeping children alive and celebrated, and absolutely should celebrate every single time a child is able to complete treatment. But it's a vast wasteland for so many families once they cross over into that role of survivorship. And there's a lot that I've had to figure out on my own. There's a lot that we've really, really struggled with. And so it's been an important charge of mine to try to help make a huge difference in the advocacy work, the awareness work, and the things that we're creating to try to help educate the community of what is needed from the perspective of survivors and their families. And then for me, more importantly, educating and making sure that survivors themselves and their families are aware of what is available, what potentially can happen next, and what they need to be aware of as they start to navigate the years after ending treatment, as their children grow up, as their children transition into young adulthood, and do the best that they can to establish their independence.
Yeah, that is all very key information. Thank you, Mary Beth, for sharing. We are going to be discussing today all about survivorship, and mainly we're going to be exploring a toolkit, the CAC2 Survivorship Toolkit. This resource is very important for all childhood cancer families, for survivors to have a resource. And that's why we have Mary Beth here. And right now we are going to introduce our other friend over here. Um, this is Mariah. Mariah, would you like to introduce yourself and tell us more about you and your role and everything and your story?
Sure. I'm Mariah Forster Olson, And I was diagnosed with neuroblastoma in 1980 at the age of 1. So in June, I will be celebrating 44 years from my cancer diagnosis. At that time, of course, there was little treatment options, and I had surgeries, radiation. But what ultimately saved my life was a experimental chemotherapy trial. Um, as a result of being treated so long ago, and with the experimental treatments, and where my cancer was located, I have just a bunch of late effects, around 100 different medical conditions and late effects that I deal with, or have dealt with. And it's been a kind of a difficult life. My There wasn't Survivorship wasn't really talked about when I was younger because there were very little survivors. So my family and I had to just kind of feel everything out, and we really didn't talk about having cancer. Kind of kept it private among the family, and it wasn't until around 2016 when I started getting involved with some childhood cancer nonprofits. I work with around 9 or 10 of them right now. But for CAC2, or the Coalition Against Childhood Cancer, which is who put out this toolkit, I'm the survivorship lead for them. I'm also the board secretary, and I am able to do survivorship work with CAC2, which is wonderful. With the other nonprofits, I'm able to do just a variety of things, which I can get my feet wet with a bunch of different things. But CAC2 has been the major place where I've been able to talk about survivorship and do these projects, including the one we're talking about today.
That's
Um,
amazing.
Other than that, I'm married to Troy, who takes really super good care of me and is a wonderful husband. I
Oh,
have a 17 and a half year old Siamese cat that is like our child. And
mhm.
just something about me that's non-cancer related, I play the oboe. So
Wow.
that's a little about me in a nutshell, but I'm really passionate about survivorship. And I'm also writing a book about my life, which I have a publisher, Bellastery Publishing, and I'm hoping to get that out soon.
That's so awesome. That's so awesome that I mean that you're also involved in this big project and that you are leading this you're also part of leading this survivorship toolkit and really involved with all the all these organizations that need to hear more about survivorship. I think that's amazing, and that's why we're here today, right? We're here to learn more about this awesome toolkit that many people don't know about. Many people don't know about CAC2, and I think this is how I met Mariah. This is how I met Mary Beth. CAC2 is the Coalition Against Childhood Cancer. And what is a good summary of what CAC2 does and how do they help the community and everybody in the childhood cancer world?
So CAC2 is a coalition, and it's made up of individuals and nonprofits, as well as some organizations, some corporations, associate members, and we all get together, and we collaborate, and we work together so that we don't duplicate efforts of work.
Mhm.
And so that those two big things were really important with creating the toolkit. Um, but Mary Beth, did you want to say anything about CAC2 and how wonderful it is?
I think the big additional comment that I would make would be that it is our community. When people say these are my people, if
Yep.
you have been affected by childhood cancer, whether it is personal because you yourself had cancer as a child, if you are a family member who has been impacted by the trauma of going through treatment and dealing with late effects, or even if you've lost a child, if you're a professional that works in this space or provides support services, if childhood cancer has touched you in any way, this is your people. This is the community. that rallies together and aligns because we all collectively want to improve the lives of children and families that are impacted by cancer. And it is a beautiful space where you don't necessarily have to have your own nonprofit. I think some people do believe that that is an expectation if you have been touched by cancer, that for some reason, I need to do it in reference to my child or, my neighbor or what have you. But it welcomes, it does welcome nonprofits, but it welcomes individuals. If you have a small amount of time or there's a particular space within the childhood cancer community, if it's research for a cure, if it's to help survivors, if you want to help support siblings and what that traumatic impact looks like, if you want to be there to support parents more or grandparents, we have some organizations that specifically focus on the impact on grandparents who are such an important population because they are impacted twofold because both their children and their grandchildren are hurting. And it's such a wonderful group of people from whatever perspective that you join CAC2 or get involved in the community. We all have great commonality. And I would just add that there's some of the most beautiful people that I've ever had the luxury to meet. I've never attended a childhood cancer event that was related to CAC2 that I didn't leave feeling more inspired, more grateful for the time that I had spent with people. And they're just some of my favorite people that I've just felt so blessed to have crossed paths with or get to call as friends because I've known them for years.
I would say they're lifelong friends, definitely. That's a great call out. The other thing I just wanted to say was CAC2 is organized around 4 different pillars, and that is research and treatment, advocacy and awareness, survivorship, and family support. So if you're interested in any of those, you can join those different interest groups or multiple interest groups or projects that these interest groups have. We're not calling them impact areas. They were called interest groups before, but they're called impact areas at this point. So those are just the 4 pillars that CAC2 is arranged around.
Wow, yeah, it's incredible. When I learned about CAC2 and you guys, because of you guys as well, Mariah, we connected through another organization. I think it's just amazing how it's just very broad and there's so many. It's really what you're looking for when you're really diving into this childhood cancer world, because you have all these categories where you are going to have somebody, at least one person to relate to, and really everybody, because we're all within this childhood cancer community. But as far as like the grieving population, the survivorship population, the patients that are currently undergoing treatment, Mary Beth, you mentioned the grandparents. I mean, it gets very specific. And like you mentioned also, like the individual people, the people who have organizations, the people who are like the doctors or the researchers. So there's many groups involved in CAC2, and hence the coalition, right? We're all working towards this, this very same goal, just to be able to all educate ourselves, help really just educate people, educate ourselves, help everybody, and letting them know there's a lot of support. So I think that is amazing. Again, why we're here today, we are going to be sharing about the survivorship toolkit, the CAC2 Survivorship Toolkit. This toolkit has been worked on in a very dedicated way. I am a testament of that because I've seen how hard Mary Beth and Mariah have been involved in this and really given it their all. I took my part as well. We've really created something that it's something huge. A lot of the credit, of course, goes to this whole team. Everybody, there was a lot of people who really were involved. But I've seen Mary Beth and Mariah just put a lot of hard work into it. So we're going to get into some questions now that I would like to ask Mary Beth and Mariah to learn a little bit more about the survivorship toolkit. My first question, and I'm going to be reading off my screen over here so I can ask these and be able to remember. So what is the CAC2 Survivorship Toolkit and what motivated this creation? And I will go first with Mariah.
Okay. So the CAC2 Survivorship Toolkit is in our education and resources for childhood cancer survivors and their families. So we saw a need to have resources for childhood cancer survivors. There wasn't anything like this out there. There are some toolkits for survivors that do exist, but they typically covered just a few different topics. We wanted to be comprehensive, and um, we're trying to cover all of the topics. Of course, that's not always possible, but we're covering as many topics as possible that we've arranged within 6 different categories. And I think that we're going to talk about that later. But the toolkit is arranged around these 6 different categories, and all of the information is in one place so that survivors and their families, professionals, nonprofit organizations can go to the toolkit and find out information about survivorship and the different challenges that survivors face, such as financial challenges, economic challenges, legal and employment challenges, just a bunch of different challenges that survivors face throughout their lives. Mary Beth, did you want to add anything on to about what the toolkit is?
Well, I guess as a segue into the second part of the question, what it is it's the answer to the 8. For 20 years, I mean, my son just celebrated his 25th anniversary. So it's very interesting that at 25 years, we finally have something available in the community that my heart yearned for, ached for. In the absence of it, I was left quite distraught most of the time, trying to find answers, trying to find resources. I work in children's issues in other disability communities, and those communities did have nice comprehensive resource hubs. There was a wonderful plethora of materials that were available to support families, to educate them about what to expect in the next stage of life for their children. What are the types of resources that you might want to consider? And I felt quite jealous, I'll admit. I'd be working in one field and just so grateful for those families having the kind of support and being able to contribute that way. And I would come home to a vast wasteland, honestly. We did the best that we could as a community. It's just, at least in the stage of neuroblastoma, the first standard of care had only been developed the year before my son was diagnosed. Wow. So my son is part of a new population of survivors for neuroblastoma. And again, while we celebrate that, what we're also realizing is, what is the price to pay when children as young as, in our case, 2 years old, are being given some of the most toxic of chemotherapies? And what does that do in the formative years? I mean, these poor little children, they're still babies practically, and they're being given life-altering substances that in the short term, as you're told in the very beginning, a child has to be alive in order to incur side effects. And you embrace that because you are fighting just for them to survive. But once the treatment is done, you realize the depth and the intensity of what that type of statement looks like as you start to discover what those side effects are, and without knowing where to turn to be able to get those answers. And there were many, many times over the years that I explored anything and everything and couldn't find answers. And I was terrified for my son. There are times that I really don't know how we survived, either because of the physicality of certain late effects or the psychological impact. The depression and the anxiety and the executive dysfunction in the teenage years was something that no one ever forewarned me about. It was absolutely terrifying. And there were times I just didn't know how any of us were going to survive. Myself as a mother, Josh, of course, as a survivor, and the impact that his brother had with trying to make sense of all of this, and not himself being able to have support that a maturing teenager deserves to have. but there just isn't time for those siblings. And that is a real impact that I think sometimes gets forgotten. And so to have an opportunity to create something that can calm the ache, that can soothe the worry. So much more comfort comes in education. Just knowing
That's key.
provides a sense of calm. Because not only is it providing information, but it communicates, we see you, we know you're there struggling, we are here with you, we have been where you've been. All of that gets communicated because it's taken people like us who have been there to know what the information is that needed to be contributed to the toolkit. And so for me personally, that was the burning desire that kept me, prodding forward and making sure that we had this toolkit crafted in a way that it could be the most helpful, it could be the most comprehensive, and looking at it from all different perspectives, because I know what my family experienced. I know, stories that I've heard from other families and what their families were challenged with. And we really wanted every single family who has endured childhood cancer, who has survived childhood cancer, to find that they have a space here. We have a huge spectrum of kids and a huge spectrum of families. Some survivors don't struggle with much at all, but they deserve to find a space that they can call their own in the childhood cancer community. And so too do our neuroblastoma survivors, our brain cancer survivors, who have endured a great deal of high toxicity radiation that unfortunately result in a huge complexity of late effects. And some of them experience the most challenging of all of the issues that are possible. And they too deserve to be able to find information, to find comfort that they are not alone, that they are seen, that they are valued, and that they are not walking this journey alone. And I think that soft handhold, while people are walking along this journey of survivorship, to me is one of the most important things that we're able to provide through all of the different resources that we have collected and have waiting for families and survivors and those professionals who support them in the toolkit.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
can I also
Right.
say, Mary Beth and I have been meeting at least once a week for going on 3 years now, working on the toolkit. And one of the things that motivated us to create this was thinking about, and I feel like Mary Beth, you should be explaining this because you've said it so many times, but the the parents that the parent that is worried about their child, that's up at 3 o'clock in the morning, that can't sleep, that is searching the internet feverishly trying to find information about what their child's going through. And we're hoping that this helps alleviate some of that, and that they'll be able to go to the toolkit and find some of the information that they need, so that they know that someone, understands, and that this information is laid out for them. So that was another huge motivating factor for creating this, is just thinking about those parents.
Yeah, and I think you guys, I mean, everything you guys mentioned is so key, and I understand it completely because of course I'm a survivor myself dealing with late effects. So I think also it's so important to highlight that like you mentioned, you're researching. I mean, this is what I was doing before too, trying to find something. I mean, what's the first thing you go to? You go to Google, and then you get into a rabbit hole of going
Yep.
in here and out there and trying to find this, trying for that. But the toolkit provides everything really that you are kind of looking for, as far as having to research a specific topic, right? Because everybody's going to be different. Everybody's going to have different late effects, and everybody's body's different. But at the same time, we all can relate because we are experiencing the late effects of the treatment. So my next question is, what inspired you to create the survivorship toolkit, and what challenges does it aim to address for childhood cancer survivors and their families? Now, you guys talked a little bit about what inspired you guys, but You can go on more to tell us about that. Or what challenges does it aim to address for childhood cancer survivors and families?
The one additional inspiration that I will add is totally observing, because I still stay very much in touch with a lot of parents and hear a lot of the conversations that are taking place in closed Facebook chat rooms and at different events. And I think the challenge in researching is very different now than it was 20 years ago. 20 years ago, it just, the internet had not exploded yet. So trying to find information out of few sources, we didn't have access to information the way we had today. So it really was a different type of hunting experience. Now, where I think one of the largest challenges is knowing who you can trust, knowing what resources are valuable, having any ability to decipher between the credible sources and the lookalikes that really could ultimately be selling. Some of it is just urban legend. I mean, I hear so many different things. And so one of the things that I'm very proud about in the toolkit is not only are we introducing resources and information that people want, but we're introducing them to all of those credible sources that when you connect to those resources, you can stop and look around in that resource space and find a lot of additional credible information as well. And some of them are very obvious how credible they are because they appear many, many times throughout the toolkit. But I think in today's world, helping people ascertain who is important and credible to listen to, as opposed to who to discount, really provides a valuable service, especially in this community with childhood cancer and late effects. What different options are backed by science? There's so much hearsay and urban legend that takes on a life of its own these days. But they do not have a home in the toolkit. Everything is backed by science. There's a lot of research abstracts that are included in it and highly credible resources that people can really trust the information that is provided there.
Mariah, you want to add on some stuff?
Yeah, I just some of the talking about the challenges too, just the sheer volume of resources and topics that we have was kind of a challenge. I know that like our working group started by just listing all of the different challenges that childhood cancer survivors face, and we ended up with 8 pages of single space bulleted items, which is a lot. Luckily they seem to fit wonderfully into 6 categories, but the sheer volume of everything that we covered this time around and that we want to cover for version 2.0 and ongoing as well is a lot. And so that was another challenge, just the sheer volume of work. And we were creating something that had never been created. So I think a lot of people doubted us or were kind of wanting to see how it was going to look and what we were going to do with it. But honestly, that challenge probably helped fuel us
Yeah.
to
Prove
do
you
it.
wrong. Yeah.
Yep.
Well, I think,
Well,
yeah.
I would even take that a step further because I think, again, you know what you know. So if you're not in the survivorship space, you aren't going to fully appreciate why something like this is necessary, nor are you going to fully appreciate the full scope of what the challenges look like. I've gotten so many comments after this has launched, not even realizing how big of an impact it can have on education, how much it can have an impact on the possibility of somebody being able to live independently, how huge of an impact it can have on the teen years. I mean, we really have approached this being very open and being quite broad. And again, wanting to make sure that everybody feels that they are able to find a space to belong. And so we had to hold in very high regard what does that full spectrum of challenges look like so that we can at least speak to it. We may not have the best resources in the beginning, but we at least represent them. And then by doing so, I hope that anybody that's been touched by childhood cancer can come to this toolkit, go through those categories and subcategories, and find something there that's at least going to reiterate and validate that their experience is real and honorable, and that somebody understands and that there is some help.
Yeah, yeah. Everything you mentioned is key. And I mean, that part of, like you said, if you don't live it, you don't know, right? And you deal with it, you deal with it, both of you deal with it, I deal with it. I mean, like you said, the dependent, I depend on people because I can't drive, you know? So I live with my mom, I live with my partner, and we all help each other out, you know, and I'm in my 30s, you know. So now it's like, okay, you can see how this is affecting you in specific ways, in many ways. The educational component, I mean, we can't stress it enough. It's huge. And that can be, I mean, that has its own house. And that's cool about the toolkit because it kind of pinpoints out like each little thing of what's important about the education as children get older, right? How is this treatment affecting their education, their employment, their relationships with people, right? Their interactions. There's just so many aspects that I love that the toolkit like talks about the financial component, like you said, Mariah. There's just so much that goes into it in depth that I think, you know, for sure this resource is very important. And I'm glad that we all, I mean, that, yeah, we were all able to kind of show the different types of communities within the childhood cancer community that this is something that, you know, is really needed. And you're, you know, and like you said, I think people kind of doubting and giving us feedback about, you know, maybe just doubting it, that made you work harder towards it and find more and really just go into it. So very good. Could you discuss the main areas covered in the survivorship toolkit and why they are crucial for survivors and their families? Mariah, you can go and then we can have Mary Beth comment.
Sure. So we have 6 categories, like I've mentioned, that cover the toolkit, that puts those 8 pages of single-spaced items nicely into those categories. And they are educational guidance and planning, insurance and financial health, physical health and late effects, psychosocial and emotional health, transitioning to adulthood, and wellness and healthy behaviors. And I think I gave most of those off the top of my head. So
Awesome.
I'm doing pretty good with the memory. But
Repetition.
those are, yeah, thank you. Those are the 6 categories we have. And then each of those categories are divided into subcategories. So when you go to the toolkit, you can click on one of those categories, and most of the categories have 4 subcategories listed below them that put the resources into those separate categories. However, insurance and financial health has 3 categories, and the physical health and late effects has 11 different categories because we organize it by like body system, um, because there are so many physical late effects that survivors deal with. That was kind of the way that we decided to arrange them. So that is how the toolkit's set up. And then, so if you go to the toolkit, you click on a category, and then you click on a subcategory, it will list all of the resources in tile form with those subcategories. So it's very easy to look at and to navigate. And that is something that we wanted to make sure we had available, that anyone could navigate it and go there and
Yeah.
hopefully find what they're looking for. Mary Beth, would you want to talk about the question and answer part? Because I
And
think
also
that's
and also Mary Beth, that's good. And then if you can tell us a little bit also about the subcategory so people know how specific this toolkit gets, and just briefly a little bit about them. Just a few.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
If you like, I actually have it up. Would you like me to show, and I can actually
Oh.
walk through so people can actually take a quick look?
Yeah.
Let me do that.
I think that's great.
So here are the 6 categories that Mariah was just explaining to you. And I'll use the education guidance and planning as a really great example of how this is broken down. So if you click on a category, one of the rich attributes, I believe, of the toolkit is we are also educating people new to the survivorship the survivorship space, what they need to be made aware of. I mean, for some, they may just be getting out of treatment or planning to end treatment in a month or so. And a lot of this, I mean, as you can tell, it does span the full spectrum of a person's life because every part of your life is impacted. So we wanted to make sure to explain when we are talking about education, guidance, and planning, what do we mean by this category? What can you expect to find here? So some paragraphs are a little bit more in depth than others. Education, guidance, and planning is a little more self-explanatory. But then as you scroll down, you will find those subcategories. So academic support is a subcategory with a brief explanation of what we are talking about for that category. Neuropsychological testing, which is a huge follow-up for a subset of the survivorship population. Very, very important if you're concerned about cognitive effect. Influencing academic success, and that's mostly focusing on how we support survivors while they're going through their educational journey. And then we have a whole section here on scholarships. And then real briefly, before I go back up to the top, at the bottom of each section, we actually have a frequently asked question guide. And what's really lovely is you can sit and you can read through the questions and then click on answers. And it will most of them guide you to an area within the toolkit or resources that we are providing in the toolkit where you can learn more about the answer to that particular question. And these questions have been designed in such a way, just like these subcategories, to help not only raise awareness about what someone might need to be concerned about for a survivor that they care about or one that they're treating, but raising some flags at times for things that might not cross their mind, so that in the education space, it might not occur to them that neuropsychological testing would be necessary to help get and secure appropriate accommodations and support for school. Those correlations aren't necessarily obvious to everybody. And so we really were quite mindful about how we laid all of this out. And so in the academic support section, once you want to view that particular subcategory, as Mariah mentioned, it's in a tile format. So it lays out a variety of resources that are in that subcategory. And there is a method to it. It does walk you through a way to think about that subcategory. And so here we're talking a lot about the introduction of special education. What are things that you need to be thinking about? A lot of people will talk about IEPs and 504s. What does that even mean? What do those terms refer to, and why is that important to me? And it gets deeper into education advocacy, parents and the role of education advocates, and what do they need to know? What does classroom support look like for kids and teens that have chronic illness? And as they're maturing, what are educational challenges? How do they evolve as your children are maturing into young adults? And even important roles like the school nurse. That's a very important role on the school campus. If you are securing care for your children before or after school, and do you have any assistance? Is there a connection in the support that's available for them in before and after care as during the school day? And what does Head Start mean? So this is just a brief overview, but every subcategory is broken out this way. And once you decide on a particular resource, like in this case, if Head Start is something that you've heard about and you want to learn more, you can click on that tile. And you are prompted to is a dialog box that actually provides to you a synopsis of what you can find using this resource. And then you can click on resource and it opens up a new tab. You do
Wow.
not lose your place in the toolkit. It opens up a separate tab and you can start to read the resource. You
Oh,
can put that aside and say, you know what, I'll get back to that. I want to check out a couple of other things in this subcategory. You close this and you can click on another resource. So there's a lot of malleability for making this as user-friendly and user-supportive as possible.
yeah. Wow. I've delved a little bit into it. I haven't had, I've need to keep digging in because it's just, guys, that's just how amazing this toolkit is. There's just, I mean, it gets you further and further to specifics. And I think that's really what makes it really unique and needed. Because we all know we need that, especially within this community, within this population, trying to find that specific resource, just like you mentioned, the Head Start, the IEP, whatever it is for, and that's just one subcategory. Right, we're talking about the category and then the subcategory, right? We dove into both the education, and then the subcategory would be the other little, like you said, the testing, the neuro testing.
Neuropsych
So
testing.
yes, so it really goes in depth. So I love it. I love it. And I think this is a great resource. We're talking about the survivorship toolkit resource from CAC2. It's very informative, and it really dives into so much about survivorship, childhood cancer survivorship. Moving on to our next question. In your opinion, how will the survivorship toolkit enhance the lives of survivors' families, and what positive change do you anticipate, Mariah?
Well, we just hope that it'll make their lives a little bit easier than what I know we've experienced. Mary Beth and I have experienced being like me from 1980 and her son from 1999, where there wasn't a lot of information available. We're hoping to provide this information for families and help them have this information so they don't go down the rabbit hole of Google and search for things, as well as reputable information like we discussed too. Because you can search for a long time on Google, it doesn't mean you're going to find information, and it doesn't mean you're going to find reputable information, but that's what we're providing here. So we hope that it helps make the lives of those survivors and their families just a little bit easier than maybe how we had it. Um, we also had three kind of objectives that we developed that we wanted to have for this project. One was creating a childhood cancer community-wide space to outline information and resources for supporting childhood cancer survivors and their families. We also wanted to empower survivors to better understand their health status and their potential to develop late effects and side effects throughout their lifespan in order to make health conscious decisions and to become a successful self advocate and attain a higher quality of life. And then the third objective was networking agencies, nonprofits, and parent advocates to align messaging when discussing childhood cancer survivorship and quality of life post-treatment. So those were objectives that we came up with at the very beginning, and that we wanted to make sure that we kept in mind throughout the creation of the toolkit. And now, after the toolkit, we want to keep those in mind.
Mary Beth, did you want to tell us what positive changes do you anticipate from it?
Well, to just, piggyback on some of the things that Mariah said and expand on it. What I have seen over the years is there's a lot of focus on the physical effects, of course, and focusing on the survivor. Here, often about the education effects because, of course, there's such a direct correlation between physical and cognitive effects of treatment and how successful you are in education. But education is the last place that you're going to see those late effects affect a person's life. And what we know for certain is it isn't just the survivor that is struggling with some of the impact of the trauma. And so I think a huge area of influence, and I think for the better, is the education and and invitation for families to allow themselves to admit how much they've been affected. The psychosocial and emotional wellness section really focuses a lot on the entire family. And, so often, in in the thick of treatment, you're just getting through every day and you don't have a chance to really think of yourself as a person. You're too busy being an advocate. And it's no matter how difficult it is for me, it's harder for my kid. And so, we toughen up and we charge forward. And what so many family members don't realize is they are being eroded away in the process. And so in survivorship, they are left most often being a fraction of what they once were. And then you have the continued late effects. So if you want to call treatment a sprint, and it really isn't a sprint, but in the correlation with survivorship truly is a marathon. And if we don't allow ourselves to heal after treatment, and that is every single person in the family, the survivor needs to heal from both the physical and the psychological and emotional and spiritual effects of going through treatment. So too does the entire family. And if we don't take the time to do it, then we're not going to be ready for the bombardment of everything that happens afterwards. And so not only do the subcategories allow us to understand how to filter and dive deeper in the areas that we want to, but it protects parents and siblings and grandparents and survivors if there's areas that they know they need to learn more about, but maybe they're not quite ready. But the comfort that it's there is a warm hug to say, when you're ready, we're here and we have information for you. And you can open this particular subcategory when you have the ability to give it some undivided attention and you feel like you're strong enough. To me, that allows us to be on the ready again. If it's 5 o'clock in the afternoon, or like Mariah said, 3 o'clock in the morning tended to be a pretty regular period where I was freaking out and pulling my hair out. So for me, that would be a time that I would be diving really, really deep. But to know that you have a trusted place that you can go to time and time again, and it will mean different things to you at different points of your life. So it will mean something very different right out of treatment, or if you're planning that last month or two, ending treatment and bridging over into survivorship, then it's going to mean 5 years after you've ended treatment. Then it will be different at 16 years old, or at 20 years old, or 25 years old. What I have found in the last 25 years is about every 5 years, every apple cart kind of gets mixed up. And I've needed a different set of resources. Some I've had to pull out that I haven't had to use for a while, and sometimes I've had to find some new things. But we've accounted for all of those various ages and stages. And so to know that you really can keep coming back and be looking for something different and feel comforted that just about everything is going to be touched upon here, and that we plan to continue to enrich all of those areas so that what is waiting becomes better and more comprehensive and more appropriate for each and every survivor out there. To me, that creates an entirely new landscape for childhood cancer survivorship. It's a new world that didn't exist before. And I get emotional when I sit and I think about that, because there's going to be a lot of families that will never know how terrifying it was to be out there in the vast wasteland. And that's a beautiful, beautiful progress to be able to have contributed to. And that makes me extremely happy. Doesn't make the problems less, but education is power. And if you can understand, if you can be forewarned what's coming, you are more equipped to have higher level conversations with your experts, with your doctors, with your specialists, with your survivorship clinic. And therein lies the richest part of what this offers, because we're not pretending to be those experts. We have a disclaimer that says we are providing you educational information, but this is not advice for your particular situation. Your particular situation is best to be served in the conversation with all of the medical experts, but we will equip you with the information so you are empowered to have a well-educated, empowered conversation, so that you can get to the root of what the issues are and learn how to best respond to them to minimize and ideally eradicate some of those late effects.
Could I mention one more thing, Juanita?
Yeah, of course.
The last count was that there are more than 500,000 childhood cancer survivors in the United States, which is a very significant number. And then if you look at all of the parents, the siblings, the grandparents that go along with those 500,000 survivors, that's a good chunk of population there. So that's another reason why this is so important, and why we're hoping it has a positive impact on the community too, because the community is growing.
Sadly, I mean, and it's always sad. It's really heartbreaking to always say
Yeah.
that, right? And
Yep.
it's something that as advocates we always emphasize. And I feel like sometimes people are like, no, that's rare, that's not, and it's not. It's I feel like these days, and it's not like you keep hearing more and more and more. And I don't think, I mean, partly I think is because we're in the childhood cancer community that we see these numbers, we keep hearing of this, but even just like in general, I feel like it's, you hear about it, you just like famous people, their children having cancer, and then you start seeing on the news, and they're like, well, are they, it's, and then we all feel like we're being hurt at that moment, like when it's somebody famous that's on the TV and their child has cancer or something. And then and it's just sad that we still need to, I mean there's always the need for advocacy. Mary Beth, you said something about also that really felt very empowering, which is the education, like power. Education is power, right? So you said, am I quoting you
Yep.
correctly? That's why BeholdBeGold's here too, and that's why we have CAC2, and that's why as advocates for childhood cancer, we do legislative work. We go out and we also go within our communities of childhood cancer and try to really, educate. I think that's the main thing that everybody's looking for, because the more we're educated, the more answers we're going to have, the more at peace we're going to be, the more knowledge we have, right? So if you're watching this today, or if you're watching this, through this platform, through the BeholdBeGold platform, or through other platforms, it's very important just to share so that more people know about this toolkit, because there's many people in our community don't really know about this type of thing. So please share about this toolkit. We really wanted to get out and let it be a voice for survivors and change and more education.
And
So our last, yeah.
can I just say,
Okay.
if you, for your listeners, if you go to the toolkit, if you have any questions, if you have any resources that you want to suggest or recommend, or anything, you can contact us at toolkit@cac2.org. That's the toolkit email. So anything regarding the toolkit, you can send there, and we will answer your questions or take your resource, anything that you say into consideration. So
Yes, and we'll definitely provide that on the link that the video will be in, and we'll provide that information. Thank you, Mariah. The last question is, what are your future plans for the survivorship toolkit, and how do you intend to ensure it continues to meet the evolving needs of survivors and their families? Mary Beth, you can go, and then we'll finish up with Mariah.
Well, a couple things. One, I think the fabric of how it's been created, just like we talked about at the beginning of this podcast, CAC2 is a beautiful composite of many different types of people who are touched by childhood cancer, and so too was our working group. So by including the professional perspective, by including the survivor themselves, by including family members. We really are getting we're creating a resource that's actually going to meet the needs, because it's those who have the desire for the information who are providing the ideas of what topics need to be accounted for, and they're sharing with us the resources that have meant to them. So as we have created this beautiful outline of overarching topics that we want to make sure to address, we were not surprised that many of the topics that we know people want to learn more about have never been written. I mean, this first issue of our toolkit, it's as if we threw out a fishing net into the ocean and we dragged in all of the important resources that people found valuable and helpful. We wanted to start with what already had been created, but there are a lot of areas that have yet to be touched. And now we have, I think, a very exciting part of the journey, which is people who are interested, who have reached out to us and said, I am happy to help in whatever way I can. And we're ready with the answer to say, we have scientific abstracts that are hard for everyday families to be able to understand what this information speaks to them and how this information can help. So can you take this highly clinical report and write it in layman's terms so that it is more meaningful to them? Or can we take advantage of your expertise, and we have a topic that hasn't been written about yet, and could you take some time to write on that topic so we can expand and enrich in an area that hasn't yet been able to be touched? So a large part of what we want to do is there's functionality we want to increase, but we want the capacity to expand. So we are looking at funding in order to be able to support the growth that we have laid out in a strategic plan. We need to support this additional layer of information that we want to be able to grow. We also want to be able to provide additional guidance. So right now, as we showed you, we have categories and subcategories, but within those subcategories, we've been able to touch on various smaller, they haven't warranted a subcategory header. I'll use as an example, in one of the subcategories, we touch upon nutrition, we touch upon exercise, we touch upon managing chronic pain, we talk about sleep, but we don't have it drilled down into that level of a filtering system. So if you come to the toolkit and you really like sleep is an issue and you want to understand how does sleep affect the overall health of my survivor, or what can I do? I'm not sleeping and I know my doctor has already told me I've got to sleep better. What are some things that I can use? What are some tools that will help me get to sleep faster, allow me to stay asleep, have a deeper, enriched sleep? And you will eventually be able to find a way to be able to type that in and go directly to the section that provides all of the resources specifically on sleep. So in one way, I want to say, you know, we already have visions of expanding it in every direction, broader, deeper, richer. But it all takes time, and we're very proud of where we started with over 500 resources right out of the gate. But you know, the next endpoint, really, the sky's the limit. It's all going to be dependent upon funding, upon people who are interested in contributing, and the resources that we're able to either find, create, or have rewritten. And so that's the exciting next leg of the journey for us.
That's amazing. Mariah, want to add on?
Yeah, there's we talked about, Mary Beth talked about creating like a search function. We also talked about creating a print function so that you can print out the different resources. In addition, we started by sending emails just to social workers, to the COG hospitals, Children's Oncology Group as COG, to survivorship clinics, to all of the survivorship organizations in Better Together via email, but we have to do more advertising. So we talked about possibly attending conferences such as the APOSW, which is for social workers, the one for oncology nurses, child life specialists. So we want to, you know, continue advertising to get this out there because we just want people using it. And this will just constantly be a fluid resource where it'll be changing, and we'll be adding to it and improving it, and you know, just making it the best that we can. So those are some of the future plans, and we hope that people, you know, come back because of the changes that we'll make, but also just come back to see you know, all of these resources that we have that can possibly help the person coming to look at them.
All of it, all of it. Those were things that I was thinking, and thank you, Mariah. Those were some of the things that I was thinking as you guys were speaking. As I was thinking, you know, it would be really cool to, yeah, provide this resource to all these individuals who are within the hospital, within the school systems, you know, within the whoever counselor or advisor these children have in school for that educational component of it. There's a lot of, I feel like, specific individuals and locations that could be sent to. So that's amazing. That's amazing. Well, thank you
Juanita,
guys. Yeah,
one last comment about
yeah.
its relevance, because it was an important decision, I think, on our part, a very wise one, is because we have over 500 resources and they're all from highly reputable sources, we didn't want the burden of having to keep tabs with what improvements as they're going through and editing and updating with new research and what have you. Everyone has a different cycle of how they go about doing it. So it's the reason why we connect you to the resource as opposed to trying to replicate that information from that resource. So it alleviates some of the burden of staying relevant because every resource, because they're reputable, are going to already aspire to have it be current, to have it be accurate, have it reflect the most respectable knowledge that's available in the community, especially if they're the ones that are doing the research on it. And so we will be going through an annual process of just double checking to make sure that all of the resources are still available. But that to me provides a great deal of confidence to people that are coming to visit the toolkit that everything that is provided is current, because we're not clogging the process of bringing and updating information ourselves. We're just a conduit to all of these wonderful and valuable sources of information.
That's amazing. Very, very important to highlight as well. That is, I mean, I love that, you know, we're again, and it's incredible that it kind of took this long for, you know, and obviously this is not anybody's fault in the sense, that's not what I'm trying to say. I'm just saying that years of, you know, this has been happening, and no, there hasn't been something very specific like this. So I think, you know, uh, it's, it's a genius idea. You know, I applaud you guys for you really taking initiative and really wanting to, you know, do something very specific like this that we know within our childhood cancer survivorship community, it's needed. It's needed. It was needed for a longest time. And like I mentioned again, this is very educational, and it releases that stress that we have, like, well, what are we going to do after treatment, right? Because I think that's talking to many families, you know, it is something that you were in the moment of having your diagnosis and you don't want to know, you just want to get better at that moment or just start the treatment process, right? You don't want to know what's going to happen later on. However, I always advocate in the sense, I'm within the mentality that's it's best to keep talking about it along the way, not putting more stressors at the moment, but at the same time, maybe right after you get out of that treatment phase of like, I ring the bell and I go on, like, let's have this toolkit available, right? Let's have it there. Let's have this doctor provide it to us, whether, and make that even a decision that the parent wants to take, right? We can give this to you before, or we can give it to you after. I don't know, what are you guys' thoughts on that? Are you do you think it's a kind of like a scary thing to open up and look at while everything's happening, or would this have been helpful now later on in the life? And I guess we're talking about you, Mary Beth, you mentioned that this was a long time. Mariah, you too, this was a long time ago for you guys. So there was no other type of resource, right? There was no passport for care kind of thing. Maybe, I don't know. But
There
you know,
wasn't.
you know what I'm trying to say though? Like, what are your opinions on that? Do we
I
want
know
to give this toolkit to a family that was just recently diagnosed, or do we want to give this toolkit to somebody after they, open that up later on?
I would probably say later on, like, I mean, even like during, you could still give it during treatment, but maybe towards the end of treatment, so that they can look forward. But it also really depends on the family, because I am co-administrator of the neuroblastoma Facebook group through the Neuroblastoma Children's Cancer Society. And I have had people ask me about late effects, and their kids are in treatment, and I'm like, well, do you really want to know? And some of them are like, maybe not. Maybe I don't want to know yet, because it's enough to deal with just what we're doing right now. And some of them want to know because they want to know what to expect. They know that it may not affect their child, but they just want to know what the possibilities are. So um, it's kind of, I guess I'm kind of saying both possibly,
Yeah.
but I would lean more towards the end of treatment, just because they're so consumed with, going
Yeah.
through treatment. That's kind of enough for a family. But I don't know if Mary Beth, do you have anything additionally that
Yeah.
you want to say or add?
Thoughts, Mary Beth, on that?
I would actually dissuade in the beginning. I mean, it's out there and it's part of the what is available, but when you're in that diagnostic fog, you're barely able to breathe. And you are being made aware of late effects, because what you have to sign is, here is your treatment, and here's every possible late effect that your child can have. That in and of itself is overwhelming. A parent really can't afford to take their energy to go down the rabbit hole and think about that child enduring those, because you're still living in the world, which is very true still today, that says your child has to be alive to endure side effects. And some of our children are surviving every single day. My son was one. I could barely get through 1 week. There were sometimes I was getting through every single hour. I really don't think that is a period when you need to be thinking, what is life going to look like at 10? I don't think many people can have the capacity. They may. And if they do, I certainly wouldn't dissuade those people, but allow those people to come forward. Allow families to be in the present. But where I was mentally in those first 2 weeks, as I said, we were lucky my son survived them, as opposed to the last 2 weeks when we were starting to think about, what do we need to think about when treatment is over? How do we prepare? So maybe a month, 2 months before treatment is over, I hear that a lot more preparation is starting for families, and this is a beautiful guide to how to start thinking about life afterwards. And also, when you have a chance to prepare, you don't feel quite so much like the bird getting kicked out of the nest. You've had a chance to kind of think through what it's like to leave the hospital, to be at home without that level of medical supervision, and guidance, and taking on things a little bit more on your own. And there's an awful lot in the toolkit that helps with that transition. So it's a beautiful bridge, as well as laying out what is waiting for you. But I think we have to allow families to progress at a pace that's reasonable for them, and allow them to, that diagnostic fog is unlike anything else that anyone can ever experience. And I really think we have to be very respectful of what that period is like as they're just getting accustomed to those terms, childhood cancer and treatment. And you really are thrown every single late effect that is possible at you. Back in the day of paper, back in 1999, when I had that meeting, I was given a 3-inch binder full of all of the worry of treatment. And there I was with my highlighter and all my Post-it notes, and I treated it like a crash course because it was. I didn't have the luxury to sit and think about after treatment was over because I was barely getting through every single day and many times every single hour. That's not fair to try to invite parents to think about things later. Even when treatment was over, I didn't have the capacity to think that far. There's a period of time for many families, not all, but for many, that they're still just getting through maybe every hour of the day or every day. It took years just for me to be able to think more than 3 months ahead of where we were. So I think we always have to be respectful of survivors and families where they are.
Yes.
But that's different than letting them know that a resource is available should they want it. And if they are asking questions that would give you an indication that it would be helpful, it means they're ready to be educated. And I think they would really appreciate becoming aware and having the opportunity to start to dive in and see what that next leg of the journey looks like for them.
Yes, definitely. Definitely. Thank you for sharing both of your viewpoints. And I agree. It is something that, it depends on the family, the individual, and it is a resource that, at the time of the moment that child's diagnosed, you're already getting bombarded with all this information and trying to think of the thought process that, wow, what? Like that's where you are at. You're internalizing all this. So, and it's hard to internalize and it's hard to comprehend. And I'm glad that both of you guys are here because you're a mother, Mary Beth, and Mariah, you're a survivor with late effects. And so we're getting all these different perspectives, and you guys are thinking about providing this to medical centers and all this so that these families can have this resource afterwards. Okay, well, we have come to the end of our chat, and discussing again the survivorship toolkit from CAC2. Thank you, Mary Beth, so much, and Mariah for coming on here and really explaining a little bit more about what it is, why is it important, and how it's going to help these survivors and families cope with the late effects of childhood cancer treatment. So we appreciate you guys. Thank you for your time and all your comments. We appreciate you.
Thank you for having us.
It's been
Thank
wonderful to
you.
be here with you. Thank you so much.